The study of the universe spans almost inconceivable extremes of size and distance and time. From the vast island of stars we call a galaxy, to the tiny atom and the particles that comprise it. From cosmic events that occurred billions of years in the past, to microcosmic events in the present that endure for only billionths of a second. To explore the universe at these extremes, the scientist builds instruments that extend his reach and his vision.
We are going to add missions. In fact, we're essentially going to pull in Artemis 3 to launch in 2027 with a revised mission profile. So instead of going directly to a lunar landing, we will endeavor to rendezvous in low Earth orbit with one or both of our lunar landers, test out integrated operations between Orion and the landers, ECLSS systems, even to the extent possible, if we can get up development components of our XEVA suits to test out vehicle interfaces, even just getting an astronaut in a suit in microgravity, we can learn a lot with the idea that we should be learning. And take this information back to inform hardware development, whether it's in the landers or in the suits before Artemis 4, where we will attempt to land on the moon.
Shaped by these magnetic fields are the spectacular prominent, titanic streamers of gas reaching heights of more than 500,000 miles above the surface. The greatest explosions in the solar system are flares. Intense bursts of light erupting with the force of billions of hydrogen bombs. They move at hundreds of miles a second. Then, after minutes or hours, they fade away. The dark areas are...
Yes, we have a temporary period of elevated energy prices, but it will not be long. In the worst case, this is weeks. This is not months. And it leads to a much better place. It leads to an Iran that's defanged, that can't threaten its neighbors, can't threaten American soldiers, and can't continue to drive up energy prices by making a mess of the Middle East. They can move to commerce, not conflict.
Well, but you have the moment we are in right now, and as you know, gasoline prices up 14% in the past week, according to AAA. Reports the national average is $3.45. We've seen oil prices spike. How high do you think oil and gas are going to go?
They shouldn't go much higher than they are here because the world is very well supplied with oil. There's no energy shortage at all in the Western Hemisphere.
Well, there you have it. If the Secretary of Energy says that there's no energy crisis, then case closed. It must be true. It definitely feels like we're in the 2 weeks to flatten the curve stage of this whole endeavor. I don't know about anybody else, but to me, I've been kind of struck by the irony. How here we are watching Zionism pushing its agenda forward, getting closer to its final objective than ever before, that final objective being the Temple Mount. I mean, they're already moving into Lebanon, taking more territory there. They're closing off the West Bank. But that Temple Mount, that's what all this is about. Even if it means bringing the world economy to its knees and causing untold amounts of devastation, and maybe that's the whole point, is that that's what they want to do, is implode the economy so that then it can be, reborn. The digital phoenix will arise. It's very, very plausible. But how crazy is it that there's so many people, whether you have the Israeli Zionists or the Christian Zionists, and even however many Muslims who look at the Dome of the Rock there and see it as sort of like the center. It's the center of God's creation in their mind. It's the center point. It's the center of everything. It's worth blowing up the world and starting World War III. That Temple Mount. But at the same time, if you dare suggest that this center point of reality isn't spinning around in 5 different directions at the same time, constantly moving through space and not the center of anything at all, if you dare suggest that it actually is fixed in the middle, this is what is so bizarre, right? Because oddly enough, most of the people I know who are hardcore dispensationalists, most of the mainstream people, you dare suggest that the earth is fixed and immovable, and, they almost lose their minds as much as saying that we are the Israel of God. I don't know, which one is more offensive? That might be that's an interesting question to ponder too. But no, you think of all the atomic explosions supposedly going on throughout the universe, galaxies of stars that are all nuclear reactions, allegedly. And here we are still fighting and dying over oil. We can't just skip that part and go to building the Dyson sphere to harness the sun's energy and become a class 3 civilization or whatever it is, class 2, I forget. It's all so dumb. But yeah, it's funny that in the middle of all this chaos, right in between the Epstein files coming out and all the fallout, which has now, of course, been largely pushed aside because of Iran and the disruption of the energy markets. But yeah, what a perfect time to, oh, by the way, we said we were going back to the moon. We were totally going to do it in February. But then we had a little bit of problems at the launch pad with the hydrogen and the helium, which...
You're running into a lot of issues. So Artemis 1, the uncrewed demonstration, hydrogen leaks, helium leaks. Artemis 2, we get out to the pad, hydrogen leaks, we fixed it, we're ready to go, helium leak. So, and that shouldn't be surprising. I mean, we all lose muscle memory, skills atrophy. So kind of our big announcement is we are going to get back to the basics. We're going to start launching rockets with frequency. We're going to get into a great cadence with SLS. So we will launch Artemis 2 in a matter of weeks. We will add a mission in 2027 where we're going to launch Orion into low Earth orbit, rendezvous with one or both of our landers. So you've got Blue Origin making a lander, you have SpaceX that's making a lander. We're going to rendezvous, dock, use that as an opportunity to stress test the vehicle, make sure it's performing as we expect, maybe even do some tests of our EVA suit, the XEVA suit for the moon. And that will set us up for further success when we attempt a landing with up to 2 opportunities. We're preparing for 2 potential landing opportunities in 2028 for Artemis 4 and 5.
Yeah, why are we using helium again to pressurize the system and test it on the launch pad? I never quite understand why helium. I mean, of course, many of you know why there would be helium going on there at the launch pad. But yeah, they had problems at the launch pad and they had to bring it back into the hangar. And then just a few days later, they announced, oh, by the way, we suddenly concluded that we're not at all ready to go back to the moon with humans. We got to do low Earth orbit test flights and do docking maneuvers and test our spacesuits and all that stuff. Yeah, we just realized that we're not doing enough flights regularly, so we're out of practice, and we got to get the muscle memory back. This dude, I forget his name with the big ears. I think he's a tech guy. He talks like a tech guy, where he's basically just saying a bunch of buzzwords and nonsense and not really telling you anything at all. But yeah, not going back to the moon. I think they pushed it back to 2027 or 2028. Bottom line, we ain't going back to the moon. Because guess what? There's something else going on. Oh yeah, COVID 2.0? Is that what we're looking at here with the Iran war in terms of instead of public health lockdowns, we have energy lockdowns? Well, that's certainly what the folks at Cognitive Dissidence, this podcast I've been listening to, I like it a lot. Here's a clip from Hervoye and Parallel Mike and Monica Perez talking about energy lockdowns.
We've been talking about this for months, haven't we? Maybe even a year on Cognitive Dissidence, and it's finally happening. And for my biggest takeaway is, I think it's a number of issues. Of course, it's oil. Of course, it's regime change, but it's to bring in technocracy, right? To like we've seen in Venezuela and Gaza and Ukraine, we're upgrading the analog systems of Windows XP to Windows 12 now. Soon we're going to have Windows 12. And even Council on Foreign Relations put out an article, one of our listeners sent it to me, saying that we need to bring in Iranian technocrats for this new Iranian government. And then once that happens, you're going to have the Middle Eastern technate. So, and I'll just add one more thing. I had two of my past podcast guests message me, three, but some of the things they said. One of them says we're watching the unfolding of the Middle Eastern technate before our eyes. Another said that he's learned a lot from me, that he used to think there was more genuine conflict between the nations, but now he's come around to seeing that most of these actors are sort of on the same page when it comes to globalism. And one more past podcast guest said that it feels like February 2020, right, with COVID, right before the tomato hit the fan. And I think he's on point. This is like March 2026, and I think this is the sequel to COVID, which is going to be used to take away our liberties and implement the digitalization agenda. So.
Yeah, there's loads that we can speak about. The thing you just said, though, I think is really interesting because we've got all the kind of same ingredients that we had going into 2020. We've got a financial crisis. There's lots of issues behind the scenes, which we'll discuss, but private credit is the one that most people are pointing to. We've got a stock market bubble. But the interesting part about the oil shock that I was thinking is that if they have oil spike over $100 a barrel, firstly, they can blame the global recession or depression on that. They'll say, oh, it was the oil shock, it was the Iranians. And then the other thing is we're going to have a situation where we might have energy lockdowns because nobody's going to be able to go anywhere. If there's no inventory at the fuel pumps, if planes are grounded, which has already started to happen, and people can't fly, and then they say, oh, we're going to have to ration energy, which actually happened in the 1970s. So they've already done all of this. And then all of a sudden, you've got a situation that's quite similar to COVID, where nobody's able to do much. And the other thing I would say to that is if we have an event that's, let's say, a cyber attack, and they blame that on Iran, and there's a banking crisis, well, now you've got everybody demanding some kind of response. And that would be technocracy. I mean, the tether and the stable coins, all of that's still to come. But if we do have a crisis that affects the liquidity of the everyday man and woman, then yeah, COVID bailouts and stimmy checks and debt grace repayments and all of that stuff. So yeah, I think it's the same. That's what I was saying in my show just last night. I think it's going to be COVID Mark II. It's going to have a lot of the same features, and we're just waiting for kind of like I know we've got the war narrative, but there's going to be an event at some point, I think. I get the feeling there's going to be a big event that kind of brings it all together and gets the everyday man and woman on board. Because right now, most people don't care about this Iranian war. They don't want to go to war. They've got no interest in it. And the only people that really are on board with it would be the Christian evangelicals who think it's end times. And we can maybe talk about that too. But Monica, let me hand it over to you.
Yeah, I've got a few things there, both from reacting to what Hervoy is saying and what you're saying, Mike. The AI bubble, which, I mean, I think we've also talked about this, kind of front ran when people were still, nobody even said the words AI bubble. We're like, wait a second, this looks like a bubble. If you look back at the .com bubble, that was bursting, and then you got 9/11. So you could have that. I agree that I feel like the cyber lockdown is the 2.0 kind of, like COVID had the actual physical lockdown. The reason I think that is this, I couldn't buy something on Amazon, and I was like, well, whatever, it's just my Wi-Fi or whatever. And then a friend of mine is like, why is Amazon not working? And the news was that they had servers hit in the Middle East, which should not really affect us, I don't think. And I'm thinking, well, they're setting us up for a cyber attack, and thinking about how you would live without that. That's a little bit in contrast with the lockdown stuff where they were trying to get you online. So I don't know what that back and forth is, but I do think a cyber attack is likely. And I also think a real false flag is what it would take to get even the MAGA crowd, who's kind of doesn't know what to do with this war president, when they didn't really think they were voting for that, although they should have known because we told them. But they could have a false flag, and I'm sure they're going to, but they could do something more serious like we've seen, just because the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania that we all bonded on as being fake, just because an attempt is an inside job doesn't mean nobody dies. So I worry a little bit about Trump because I think they just gave him his marching orders. I can tell you why I think that, but they just gave him his marching orders. They didn't have to tell him what they really knew about the risks of retaliation, how long the war would be. That just his was not to wonder why. His is just to do or die, and maybe do and die.
And just to add to that, we're seeing again the signals being put out there. And I think for us that have real good discernment, we're able to form these patterns and accurately extrapolate, predict the future. And again, one of my guests said, messaging me, and I think he's on point, what we saw in Mexico, which I did a podcast on, it was Operation Gladio, a Mexican division. And that, I think, is the shape of things to come. It's almost like they were what happened in Guadalajara here, burning 300 cars. And, they didn't really target civilians, but it was almost like that was what we may see in the U.S. And it's wild to see Alex Jones. Like, again, I keep an eye on him. And the other day, his newsletter, and it's like so mainstream media. He's got some pretty lady with big boobs in the studio with him. And he's like, I predicted the Iranian sleeper cells. So the sleeper cells are going to be activated in the U.S. And it's like, guys, really? Come on. That's false flag. And so the guy who, made his mark on being the anti-false flag guy is now literally the tip of the spear, as he used to say, leading the false flag operation. So they've seeded that narrative of Iranian sleeper cells. And as you say, Monica, I would not be surprised if we begin to see these Iranian sleeper cell false flag operations across the United States.
So yeah, that was a little bit of a longer clip, almost 8 minutes, but it kind of encapsulated their whole take on the Iran war situation pretty well, I thought, and also kind of gives you a pretty good taste of the Cognitive Dissidence podcast overall, which I definitely recommend. I mean, they have pretty good analysis, as all three of them are pretty solid researchers in their own right, not just Hervoye, but I really like Hervoye a lot, and he has his own podcast where he interviews different guests and talks about technocracy and talks about all the moves being made to install a one world government. So if you're looking for your ears to be tickled and you want some kind of political earthly hopium, this is not the podcast for you. But if you want real reporting and real analysis, then yeah, geopoliticsandempire.com. He also has a Telegram, which he's a busy dude, man. He posts a lot of stuff in his Telegram, so check that out too if you're on Telegram. And I hate to say it, but it makes so much sense in terms of all the different things, all the birds that you can kill with this stone of the quote-unquote Armageddon War, the drone war with Iran. Because as we've already seen, we've had that quote-unquote Muslim shooter in Texas, I think. We've had cyber attacks, cyber false flags. I mean, you can really unleash the gamut, right? Because this is what will push us into all that asymmetric warfare stuff. And yeah, the weaponizing of AI, they can basically kind of open up the new toy box of disruptive things. And in the end, it's really all about the economy. It's the controlled demolition of the old fiat system, which has to implode. I mean, it's fiat currency. And it really started, I was watching this interview with this guy, this finance guy, who was also in crypto, and he explains how it basically started in 2008. The implosion of the US dollar.
They orchestrate an event and manufacture it, which almost every major global event is manufactured for the most part. They actually achieve multiple agendas simultaneously. Not two birds with one stone, it's probably 10 birds with one stone, okay? And they divert your attention to another issue. So you don't understand what's actually happening underneath the surface. And essentially, it's a deterioration of the financial system because of the unsustainable debt levels that are rising extremely high. And every currency reset throughout historically, happens in a sequence. And it always started with extremely high debt levels from reckless monetary policy. And eventually, the second part of that sequence is high inflation and then hyperinflation. And the third part of the reset, which really is the nail in the coffin, is civil unrest. Now, we're still in the process of that that transition. We haven't had civil unrest yet, but what we're seeing right now is a deterioration of purchasing power, and it's all because the fiat mechanism of the fiat mechanism and the banking system, from expansion of credit and debt, which ultimately expands the money supply and has huge implications on the system over time. And the whole system was designed to collapse at some point anyway. The bankers, that the architects of the system, they knew that it would be unsustainable and it would not last indefinitely. It would come to an end at some point. And that's why for over a decade, they've been working on a new system. It's been hidden in plain sight. The documentation is there. They speak about it in plain sight at their conferences, at their panels. They're putting all the building blocks together that ultimately will serve as the pieces and elements for this new infrastructure they're building out. But the point I'm making is that all the signals saying that we're going into some sort of deflationary bust or recession are actually flashing as we speak. Now, again, to answer your question, not to get off topic, when that happens, they will have to expand the balance sheet tremendously to pull us out of that bust. And they will, because these crises and busts, they happen, it's cyclical. They will always happen. We will have another black swan event. Every time there's a financial crisis, the signs are there, the early signs, but when the crisis happens, they have to create a narrative and a story or a headline to achieve multiple agendas simultaneously, but at the same time, primarily to have an excuse to liquefy the system and a justification for money printing and devaluing the currency. So there will be another crisis, and when it happens, there will be another story. And we're seeing these stories starting to float around right now, perfectly within our model, which was suggesting between March and June of 2026, which we could talk about momentarily. But to answer your question, when they do expand the balance sheet by trillions of dollars, that will be real quantitative easing. Okay. What we're seeing now is a gradual injection of liquidity in the system. The Fed buying $40 billion in treasury bonds, just patching up the little holes and cracks. But the system hasn't really broken down yet. It's not at its final straw, but when it does, they're going to have to expand the balance sheet by trillions and cover that up with some manufactured catalyst. But this could keep going on for years. But they've already created a solution to keep it going on for even longer. And that's the Stablecoin Genius Act. Okay? Because the stablecoins basically create a captive permanent buyer for treasury bonds artificially. And now they have artificial demand permanently by default, where stablecoin issuers have to buy treasury bonds for every stablecoin they issue. And as stablecoins continue to grow, which they are, that's inevitable, it's going to continue, then the demand for treasuries is going to grow, which means now they have a solution to keep the current debt-based system actively running and devaluing the currency. So essentially, we're in a slow default. It's like a default, you know, they're never going to be able to pay back their debt. It's not going to happen. At some point, we don't know when it will be, but at some point, they will have to introduce a new solution on a grand scale. This will be a new system. This will actually manifest in the real world and affect everyday people. We're not there yet, but we're on that path.
So yeah, between the banking crisis, then you had COVID, and now a long protracted war, which again, it's so convenient that you have a guy like Trump in office who everyone can totally believe that he is just too stubborn and too arrogant. Again, it's like this is the role he was born to play. Was the crazy dude who would get us into an unwinnable war with mountainous Iran that would sabotage the entire economy. And then they can blame that. They can blame Trump, you can blame Muslims, you can blame Zionists, they don't care who you blame, right? The whole point is that you blame somebody other than, no, this was planned from the beginning. It's kind of like during COVID when people were pointing the fingers at the Chinese or pointing the fingers at the Wuhan lab and pointing their fingers at mismanagement. And when in reality, the whole thing was planned and war-gamed out years in advance. And it really had nothing to do with keeping you safe. You know, keeping people healthy. Just the opposite. But it was really, at that point, the largest wealth transfer in human history. And so this might actually surpass that as we go into a massive energy scarcity. Which, isn't it weird if only like 25, when you do the math, like if only 25% of the oil in the world goes through the strait and you suddenly cut that off, why the price of oil would go up to double? On its face, doesn't that kind of defy the laws of supply and demand? I don't know. I'm no economist, obviously, but to me it is kind of fascinating going back to NASA, the cosmology topic. Hervoye said something in that clip about how all the countries are basically colluding together at this point to give us this impression of war, to basically help create, just like with COVID. And that's the hardest thing for people to kind of swallow, I think, in order to believe that COVID was a hoax or that the Iran war could be just as planned out and war-gamed out. And, really, it's a war on the people of every country. It's the elites versus the plebs. So it is a war, but it's an asymmetric war that involves all kinds of things that have economic and health ramifications, right? And we've already seen that with all these weird fires going on for years. That's part of the asymmetric warfare. Being poisoned through the air, water, and food is part of the asymmetric warfare. And yeah, through a medical system that's constantly trying to... I saw a thing recently where Oregon just passed a law to give people free cancer screenings. And I was like, wow, yeah. There you go. If I wasn't convinced that cancer diagnosis was essentially a weaponized thing before, then Anyways, I'm totally getting off topic, but when Hervoye mentioned that thing about all the countries working together, and here we are with the whole world supposedly going to war over energy, prepared to fight over the Straits of Hormuz, and we have this whole big drama going on in the Middle East because of oil, and they're willing to bomb, they don't care about the environment when they're bombing oil tankers and blowing up oil fields and creating acid rain. And yeah, where'd the environmentalists go? But meanwhile, down in Antarctica, everybody's still getting along just fine. Everybody's obeying the rules. I was watching something that said you couldn't even touch the snow. Like if you're a tourist down there, you can't even go off the designated... It's so tightly controlled, right? The environmental laws down in Antarctica. And yeah, I'm sure the anti-flat earth people probably think that Antarctica is like the nail in the coffin for the flat earth. But whatever happened to that dude, by the way? What's his name? The pastor guy who went down there. I haven't even seen him doing anything lately. I don't know. But yeah, the 24-hour sun. Totally proves you're on a globe. Okay, if you say so. But let's not forget what Admiral Byrd said about all the resources down in the southern quote-unquote continent.
Well, we've found enough of coal within 180 miles of the South Pole in a great ridge of mountains. It's not covered with snow, enough to supply the whole world for quite a while. Well, that's the coal. Now, there's evidence of many other minerals. We are pretty sure there's oil. Now, that coal shows the bottom of the world. Now, by far the coldest spot in the world. Where that coal is gets 100 below zero in the winter. Well, it was once tropical. So we think there's oil there, and there's evidence, probably uranium there.
Yeah, 1959? The Antarctica Treaty. It's funny how there's never been any conflict or fighting over the Antarctic resources. I mean, it'd be the easiest thing to take, presumably, if it's just a continent. Anyways, that's just kind of funny. But no, it's all about the Middle East, Middle East technate. That will be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. These economic zones, these blocks that are being created more and more. I mean, Hegseth and Trump are talking all about, I think Trump made more comments about Canada recently, and Hegseth basically laid out, this new plan for North America.
That is why President Trump has drawn a new strategic map from Greenland to the Gulf of America to the Panama Canal and its surrounding countries. At the Department of War, we call this strategic map the Greater North America. Why? Because every sovereign nation and territory north of the equator, from Greenland to Ecuador and from Alaska to Guyana, is not part of the global south. It is our immense security perimeter in this great neighborhood that we all live in. Each one of these countries border either the North Atlantic or the North Pacific. Each one of these countries sits north of the two basic geographic barriers that exist in this region, the Amazon and the Andes Mountains. This is basic geography that we don't teach in schools as much as we should. And it restores our North-South relations, and we must get it right. In the North, the United States must enhance posture and presence in cooperation with you and our sovereign partners to defend our shared immediate security perimeter. In the South, meaning south of the equator, the other side of this great neighborhood, we will strengthen partnerships through increased burden sharing. This will enable you to take a greater role to defend the South Atlantic and the South Pacific, and to secure critical infrastructure and resources in partnership with us and other Western nations.
And he's describing the North American Technate, as Patrick Wood said in a clip a few videos ago. They've been planning this since like the 40s, at least. These zones. You carve up the world into these big economic blocks, and then it's all about implementing the digital blockchain ledger for not just for your money, but for all assets and all transactions. And what they want to do is put everything on the blockchain. This is what Larry Fink from BlackRock, who's also now the interim chair of the WEF, they want to make everything tokenized. This tokenization of the world is pretty much the craziest thing. The fact that they're even saying it out loud is pretty astounding. What they're setting their minds to do. That will be the greatest wealth transfer in all of history. And yeah, the absolute totalitarian system. So yeah, this stuff isn't fun to talk about or think about, or, I guess we could just talk about how stupid NASA is all day. I was thinking about this earlier, and I was like, if we're going into another COVID type, maybe they won't lock everybody down using mandates or whatever, but they don't have to. That's the whole point, is that if everyone is so squeezed and more people start getting laid off, yeah, it's going to be, it could get really ugly. It could get really, they keep talking about the civil unrest, and I was also thinking about, with ICE and these stories that have been coming out about them converting big warehouses into detainment centers, which is just, the most dystopian thing. This is crazy, because you gotta know that ain't just for illegal immigrants, straight up. So I haven't even wanted to talk about these detainment center things because it's just so nightmarish, but you have to think realistically, why are they getting ready? Now that you see it, kind of like ICE comes out in the first year of Trump's second term, and then, it's supposedly all about deporting the illegals and people getting used to the idea of masked federal agents just roaming around grabbing people. But what happens if we really do get civil unrest because the dollar collapses, and whether you have riots and that sort of thing, or just the slow, gradual, I kind of think about more the slow, gradual criminalization. They've already done it, basically, criminalized homelessness. And so you just kind of gradually bankrupt people, push people out on the street, and then in the middle of the night, you just sweep them up, and nobody knows where they go. You want to talk about conspiracy theories that nobody wants to talk about or think about. To me, that's like, I'm more or less convinced that it's already going on. It's just a matter of what the scale is and how much it's going to scale up. But yeah, the digital gulag, the algocracy, whatever you want to call it, this is what we're staring down the barrel of. The beast system. And yeah, so I was thinking about COVID and like going through another insane thing like that. And I was reminded that, what? A lot of people got saved during COVID. Some of you who are listening to this right now probably are only here because God got your attention during that crazy time, and realizing that, like, oh, wait a minute, all these systems that are in place, all of a sudden they're all bowing the knee. All of a sudden they're all in lockstep. And you could see it, and it was freaking you out, and yet so many people around you were like, whatever. It's a killer flu. They're just trying to keep us safe. So, you've seen it. The mask came off. For depending on where you lived, some places it was just a few months, and some countries it was like years, and yeah, they had camps, and it was crazy. Looking at you, Australia. But yeah, that is the situation that we are in, and there are choices to be made, not just about, what do you do in a time of civil unrest or economic hardship, all the practical things, the survival things, and growing your own food, and these are important things. These are important questions. By the way, I just saw this, here, Here, I'm going to do I'll do a free recommendation right now, a free ad plug, because my friend sent me this. Texas Ready Seeds. Just go to texasready.net. My friend was at an organic farming seminar months ago, and they had a booth there with this Texas Ready. And yeah, they have these seed banks that you can buy like kits for. It's all organic, and they come in a little ammo box. So yeah, that's not a bad investment, I think. I think it's a pretty good value. I think if you know how much seeds cost, if you try and buy them at the store, and they're probably not even these are heirloom veggies. So stuff like that is good. Stuff like that, if you have the means and you have the land to grow it on, you don't need a ton of land to grow a lot of vegetables. So yeah, wherever you get it from, some of you already have your own homesteads, and hopefully you're prepared to harbor suburbanites like us one day. The city folk might need you guys, the homestead people. So you're very important in this whole scheme of things. But again, the digital, it's going to affect everybody, whether you're wherever you live. So the true preparation, the true prepping that we have to do is spiritual, and being willing to be faithful to who God has called us to be, no matter whether it means spending time in a detainment warehouse or being there's people right now being trucked around back and forth through these ICE facilities. Who knows how many of them are actually citizens, and they're beta testing all that stuff. But if you create real chaos, and this is now when we're in a time of relative stability. So the most important thing to have in those times would be, your faith and your foundation of salvation, and knowing that no matter what happens to you in this world, you know where you're going. And that cannot be overstated. But second to that would be having people around you who you trust. And that's another thing that COVID, I think, should have helped us learn, was that, who do you trust when it comes to with your children? Who would fight to the death to keep them from getting poked with the experimental juice, and who would just, give in and be like, okay. And if we get into crazy energy, gas rationing, or people just getting priced out of everything, who are you going to trust? Who are you going to rely on? Who are you going to turn to? Is worth pondering. And some would say that, this is something we should have been thinking about years ago. Man, there's so many things I wish. Do you ever do that? Do you ever stop and go, man, if I knew everything I knew now, when I was 20, what would I do? Would I be able to just think, like Sarah Connor, knowing that Judgment Day is coming? Would I be, what would you do if you had all this knowledge then? And you could even drive yourself crazy with those kinds of what ifs, thinking, I wish I had land, I wish I had, stockpiled this or saved that, or wish I hadn't spent so much time. But God allows us to go through all that stuff and to chase our own earthly dreams and desires and plans. And He allows them to not always work out the way you thought, to bring you to where you need to be, to where you finally get real with Him and get real with that the world is fallen. That man is not looking out for his fellow man, for the most part. Certainly not the people in government and on the boards of corporations. They are not looking out for you. But we have someone far greater than any of that who is, and who knows you better than you even know yourself, and has never abandoned you, even if you felt that way, but has prepared you for such a time as this, has chosen to have you be alive today and ministering in a time as this. It's weird how, I was talking about Gnosticism in recent videos, and it's been a while since I've had a bunch of people kind of come out of the woodwork and defend Gnosticism and, say all the cliche things about how or religion is a control mechanism and Jesus is just another deception, and, all the stuff I've literally heard thousands and thousands of times. The whole zeitgeist retort. I get it. I get it that people have seen, just like in the government, and now I think being constructed on a level, this whole Christian Zionism, if Christian Zionism is blamed for tanking the world economy, it's not going to be so popular to be a Christian. FYI. If people's concept of, you're a patriotic American and you love God is Pete Hegseth, then yikes. That's painful to even think about. But I think that is essentially what it's designed to do. We had our little quote-unquote revival during the Charlie Kirk aftermath which was all staged and all fake and gay and saber rattling already, even then. I mean, it just makes sense, right? They knew what they were going to do. But, I think the days of the institutional church are going to be dwindling, especially, depending on what happens with the economy and if they really are tanking the US dollar on purpose. We will see, just like we did with COVID, we'll see who is willing to bow the knee and who's willing to just do whatever it takes to try and maintain their status quo, to try and maintain their institution rather than their integrity. You'll see some very disappointing things from public figures. But you'll also see people rise to the occasion and stand up in faith and in boldness and be willing to lose everything for the sake of being obedient to God. Yeah, COVID was just a preview. COVID was just a taste. It was an act of grace, I think, to help us really prepare our hearts to just be willing to lose everything if necessary. But not for nothing. It's not to save the West. It's not to save America. It's not to regain the Holy Land for the Judaizers. What good is the land going to do you if you don't have eternal life? What's the point of having your own little kingdom on a rock floating in a void if they're, and acting like it's the most important thing in the universe? And it's crazy now looking back on dispensationalist doctrine. The craziest part of dispensationalism to me now is not the pre-trib rapture teachings or even the Zionist part. It's the third temple. It's the fact that I was watching YouTube and suddenly it switched to an ad where it wasn't really an ad though, it was a little mini sermon by David Jeremiah. I used to listen to him on AM Christian radio all the time years ago. David Jeremiah talking about the third temple and how in the millennium we're all, there's going to be a restored third temple and Jesus is going to rule from the third temple and they're going to restore the sacrifices. And I'm just sitting there going, this is so blasphemous and so contrary to everything that the gospel teaches. The idea. And this is why I think the Satan's Little Season, you basically just invented your own version of the same heresy. Oh yeah, he already came back in 70 AD and rebuilt all the buildings and built all the cathedrals and built, all this earthly, free energy, whatever it is. Third Temple is like, you got the fringe conspiracy version and the mainstream version, which they're essentially guilty of the same crazy, blasphemous idea of Jesus desiring temples made of stone. And all these people fighting over the Middle East are willing to die or to kill other people's kids. It's crazy. Heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. What kind of house are you going to build for God? And whether you think of that as metaphorical or more literal, the point remains the same. So yeah, whether or not people, I kind of feel like Flat Earth has it's kind of achieved its purpose in a lot of ways, regardless of whether most people are prepared to really even consider. So many people, it's just, it's a bridge too far in terms of like the being willing to be ostracized from society and being willing to just be ridiculed, and it's just not worth it. Most people just won't. It's not because believing in space actually impacts their life like the price of gasoline. It doesn't. I mean, how can there be so many pilots who actually believe that the Earth is flat and it doesn't actually impact the way they fly? That whole debate over whether you would have to pitch the nose. Apparently you don't. You just fly flat. It's funny how it doesn't make any difference. And then you have all the questionable flight routes and why they do emergency landings in Alaska when they should be doing them in Hawaii and all that stuff. But like at the end of the day, really, deep down, they know that like they aren't distracting the world with a cheesy NASA moon landing. You better make that footage phenomenal. I mean, now you have like everyone's walking around with a camera in their iPhone. Cameras are tiny, so if you're going to do a fake moon landing, you should have like 1 million cameras on everything, capturing the footage from like 50 angles all at once. In fact, they should have that on the ISS already, or they should just have like, have you ever wondered why they don't just have live cams going on in like every corner of the ISS at all times? Inside, I mean, watching them work, actually do work, not just perform. They don't do that. I think I saw a thing that were like half of Americans don't even believe in the moon landing anymore, which is amazing. So in that sense, I feel like it's accomplished its purpose in that the seed is planted, and most people, even if they like think flat Earth is ridiculous, Most of them still are imagining a disk floating in space. So, but the idea of colonizing Mars and moon missions, when, if we can't even feed our citizens, why are we spending all this money on all these shenanigans in space? Most of the world at this point, through the internet, has at least heard of the idea that the Earth is flat. And even more so, more people, because of media and telecommunications, all the modern conveniences and technology, all that technology has to offer. Most people now, although maybe not in places like China with the firewalls, but most people in the free world, quote unquote, have had a chance to learn about Jesus and to read the Bible, which talked about all this stuff, oddly enough, about there being some sort of mark where no one could buy or sell. Predicted it thousands of years ago. How is that even possible? I mean, Jesus told us that when you see all these things happening, look up, for your redemption draws near. The wars and rumors of wars and famines and earthquakes and unrest, right? I mean, that's why it staggers me that people are like, oh yeah, all that stuff happened in the first, not even just in the first century, but basically in a 40-year time period. Between the ministry of Christ and 70 AD, they think that, like, Matthew 24, it's describing stuff happening on a worldwide cataclysmic scale, and you think it's the destruction of the temple? And then why did God use Roman soldiers to actually pry all the stones apart? If it was this, the judgment from God will be exponentially more intense than anything that happened in 70 AD. Not that wasn't very significant and very intense and horrific for the people who were trapped in Jerusalem, eating their own children and everything. It was judgment from God. And it was the end of the old covenant and the temple system, but they still want to build that temple, right? They still want to create their own mercy seat or whatever, their own throne. You know, whether an Antichrist figure will stand in a rebuilt temple or if that's just metaphorical remains to be seen from my perspective. I could go either way, and so I don't really feel compelled to pick one. There's so many versions of, there's so many false Christs being preached right now. It's amazing. Like, the Catholic Christ is an antichrist. The Talmud is antichrist. You know, Jesus boiling an excrement. You know, that's pretty antichrist. The New Age Christ, the Mormon Jesus, the Moonies, the Scientology. Does Scientology even talk about Jesus? I mean, anyways. All this stuff that's been going on for generations already has been an escalation of spiritual deception and idolatry, and end times deception is all around us. So yeah, there could be some pretty big false flag events coming up that will try and galvanize this implosion. I don't know. And so yeah, when it comes to, like, what am I staying centered on? What am I staying grounded and firm in? It's the reality of Jesus and the promises that we have in Him. If flights are being grounded and transportation is becoming too expensive and everything is grinding to a halt, we know that Christ is with us wherever we go. And that when you put your faith in Jesus, He promises to dwell within you. This isn't something we're born with. This isn't something you just wake up to. That's what the Gnostics teach, right? That, like, oh, Christ has been in you all along and you just forgot. The Christ consciousness, the divine spark. No. The Holy Spirit comes through faith, through repentance, becoming born again. Jesus said you must be born of water and spirit. Jesus taught being born again through faith in Him as the Son of God, not through reconnecting with your own divinity. So these people who try and say that, yeah, Jesus taught gnosis and Jesus taught divinity within you, it's just a lie. It's a very serious, so that's, whenever I see these people in comments and stuff, I engage, because it's like, if no one's ever warned you, I feel compelled to do so, because you don't know how serious your error is. And what you're really missing out on, the real truth of walking in faith in Jesus, is so far superior to anything that the mystery schools teach. True peace, true forgiveness, not in the denying of your own personhood and just ego death and basically becoming nothing. It's like, that's basically glorified nihilism, where it's like you just become the void, you become the nothing, and that's like becoming enlightened, becoming God, because they believe God is nothing. That's basically what even many Kabbalists teach at the end of the day. The highest form of God is unknowable nothingness. And so you just embrace it's like spiritual suicide, but framed as freedom. And it's not, it's suicide. It's the opposite. You are a person created in the image of God, a personal God who knows you and loves you and who gave his son to die for you. And he's real, and he's allowing all this to happen so that he might be glorified in the end and proven to be true. Let me close by reading from Ephesians chapter 4, starting verse 1. I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. That verse right there just destroys dispensationalism, by the way. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. In saying he ascended, what does it mean that he also descended into the lower regions of the earth? He who descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. How do you go above the heavens if the heavens are space? Just asking. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness in deceitful schemes. Deceitful schemes? That sounds conspiratorial. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. Now I say this and testify in the Lord that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to their hardness of heart. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity. But that is not the way you learned Christ. Assuming that you have heard about Him and were taught in Him as the truth is in Jesus, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you.